Bard on the Plains podcast with Mike McPeak. It's about stories, mine and yours.
This podcast has been about me sharing stories growing up on the plains of South Dakota and the different experiences I've had. I've talked about all kinds of things, but one subject I tried to stay away from is politics. There's plenty of places you can go to hear about that, whether you agree with them or not. And if you really want to hear my views, you can check them out on my Twitter feed where my handle is DSC Chipman. I've always tried to make this a place where you could get away from those kinds of discussions. But with an election coming up, I thought I would share my political journey and how I got to where I am today, how it shaped my beliefs, and then encourage you to vote. The earliest political memory that I have is of Bobby Kennedy being assassinated. I was only 6 years old at the time, but I do have a few memories of it. It happened on the same day as South Dakota's primary election because I do remember my mom working at the local polling place, which was the schoolhouse around the curve from us that I've talked about in previous episodes. But I do have a vague recollection of watching it on TV and seeing how my folks reacted to the horrible events of that day. And we've always been involved in politics one way or another. Maybe not always directly, but there is always some part of it in our lives. As I've mentioned on other episodes, we belong to the National Farmers Organization, or the NFO. I've talked about them before, but one of the things that they were trying to do was improve the quality of life for farmers. And sometimes that involved politics because the government would definitely influence what we did on the farm, either through restrictions placed on us by farm programs that we had that had become essential if you wanted to make a profit, or because of the grain reserve program that would influence grain prices. So my parents would get involved in different activities. One I remember was in 1978 when Ken Stoffren was running for the South Dakota Senate seat in Washington. I would have been about 16 at the time, but my folks believed that his policies would be beneficial for farmers, so they campaigned for him. This was my earliest involvement in politics. I would go door to door in Clark and hand out campaign information to people when they came to the door and just try to make people aware of what was going on. Obviously, at that age, I didn't have a firm grasp on the politics of what was going on, but I did it to help support my parents. He ended up losing the campaign, but that was, for me, the start of paying attention to politics. Sometimes you are the product of the times that you live in. As I've mentioned before, there's a big age gap between me and my other siblings, ranging from 14 years to 21 years. So they grew up in the 60s, in a time of peace, love, and they were going to change the world era. And part of their beliefs was that society could be changed through government programs. I, on the other hand, grew up in the 70s and was first able to vote in 1980. By that time, we could see that politics wasn't all that we'd hoped it would be. Jimmy Carter was president, inflation was out of control, gas prices were high, and farm prices low. And everybody was discouraged and looking for a change. Along came Ronald Reagan, who said that we should be able to keep what we have earned and have worked for. As I've mentioned before, my dad always promoted a strong work ethic, and I always saw him struggling to try and make a living on the farm. So when Ronald Reagan said a person should be able to keep what they make, that resonated with me. And so I listened to what he had to say. And it was similar to what I learned growing up about responsibility, hard work, and helping your fellow man. And that's the beliefs that I have embraced throughout my life. Now, this has put me at odds with the rest of my family because I believed in smaller government and that social programs aren't all that they are cracked up to be or the best option for people in the first place. Then along came the farm crisis of the 80s, and having to deal with government programs for farming and all the rules and restrictions that they placed upon the farmer, I grew even stronger in my beliefs that social programs were not the best path for the country. And I firmly believe that if it wasn't for the policies that Ronald Reagan implemented, I would not be sitting here doing this podcast. It was relaxing taxes and regulations that allowed the economy to grow. Since everyone got to keep more of what they earned, this encouraged people to take bigger chances. Young entrepreneurs like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs took risks and made bold moves that paid off, which have led us to where we are today. A person with a computer and some knowledge can create a business that may lead them to become economically self-sufficient, or allow a former plowboy from South Dakota to spread his ideas around the world. I also get tired of hearing about how Republicans are cold and uncaring and want people to starve to death. Just because we don't run around and tell everybody how wonderful we are at spending other people's money to make ourselves look good doesn't mean we do nothing. We give quietly because the outcome is more important than the act itself. Also, we think people in general are more capable of taking care of themselves than most people think, and all they need is some encouragement. We will definitely help anybody who truly needs it, but to do so indiscriminately just encourages dependency. When I first registered to vote, I did as a Democrat, partially because the rest of my family was Democrats who told me Republicans were selfish and money grubbers, and partially because Ted Kennedy was running in the primaries for president. I didn't want him to get the nomination, so I voted against him. Not the most intelligent reason, but I've heard of stupider ideas in politics. But eventually I changed my affiliation to Republican because I knew that was the party that most represented what I believed in. But I gradually became disenchanted over the political system. There seemed to be diminishing differences between the parties and were driven more by special interests, not by the people themselves. When Barack Obama was elected, I was really upset by his attitude, which seemed to say, "Be quiet, we know what's best for you." Obviously, this didn't sit well with someone who thought the average person does a better job of determining their lives than people who know nothing about you, who live in Washington but still want more control over your life. But then Donald Trump came along. At first I thought, what does a TV reality star know about the government? Which was the same criticism made of Ronald Reagan, who was a movie actor. But the more I listened to him, the more I realized that he got it. He was saying things that I had been having issues with. Has he been perfect? No. He has said and done things that have made me cringe, but overall he has espoused the beliefs that have made this country great. Self-reliance, freedom to determine your own future, and that smaller government is better. If I'm going to be completely honest, I was never more proud of the state of South Dakota than this past July 3rd when President Trump stood beside our Governor Kristi Noem at Mount Rushmore, celebrating everything that has made this country great, where anyone who wants to make something of themselves will have the opportunity to do so. If I have offended you, tough. I've lost followers on Twitter and have been thrown off a podcast because of my views, but I won't change my opinion. Like Shakespeare said, to thine own self be true. Now, I've told you all this to explain my political journey. If I've changed your mind, welcome to the free world. If I haven't, I don't really care because I've wasted too much of my time talking to people who are too pig-headed to listen. I did this to explain why I think the political system is important and to appeal to everyone to participate. First, I would encourage everyone to read our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and Bill of Rights. Get an understanding of what the framers of this country had in mind when they created it. They worked hard to free themselves from an oppressive system and tried to implement checks and balances that would maintain the equilibrium between government and the people. Second, try to have at least a basic understanding of an issue. Many of them are complicated, but if you have a little understanding of what's going on, that's better than knowing nothing at all. Don't be afraid to ask questions, but sometimes it's also good to quit shouting and listen to the other side. Don't accept everything at face value. Think about what the unintended consequences might be. Third, vote. The system will go on no matter what you do, so you might as well have a say in it. Anyone who doesn't vote does have the right to complain because of the Constitution, but you stand on really shaky ground when you do so. Complaining doesn't fix anything, voting does. Lastly, but most important, participate. Learn all you can, work hard, and try to become the best you can be. The greatest government in the world won't do anything for you if you just sit there. Get up and participate. Remember, you are the author of your own story.
If you have a story you'd like to tell, contact Mike on Twitter at BardOnThePlains or by email at bardontheplains@gmail.com. For more information about the stories in this podcast, visit bardontheplains.com.